Hello, this is Rachel Durkin Durga, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the 17th of December issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Canadian neo-Nazi was man behind the curtain of global terror attacks, Crown says, calling for 20-year sentence, by Jacques Gallant. While a Niagara region man may now be remorseful for producing recruitment videos for a neo-Nazi terrorist group and writing racist manifestos that inspired attacks around the world, the deadly consequences of his actions will live on for years, a Toronto judge was told Tuesday. Matthew Althorpe, quote, remains a danger to the public, end quote, federal prosecutor Amber Pashuk told Superior Court Justice Jane Kelly during a sentencing hearing, asking that the 30-year-old man be sent to prison for 20 years. The defense, which will present its sentencing arguments in January, is asking for a sentence of 12 to 14 years. Althorpe pleaded guilty in October to facilitating terrorist activity, instructing a person to carry out terrorist activity, and willfully promoting hatred against identifiable groups, as he admitted to making videos for the since disbanded Atomwaffen Division, an international neo-Nazi group listed as a terrorist entity by several countries, including Canada, in 2021. He also wrote racist and violent manifestos that still exist online today and have been cited by people who committed acts of terrorism, including an attacker who killed 2 people in a shooting outside a Slovakian gay bar in 2022, and a teenager who stabbed 5 people near a mosque in Turkey in 2024. Quote, Althorpe is the man behind the curtain, end quote, Pashuk said. These were not just some, quote, ill-conceived and regretted social media posts, end quote, the Crown said. Rather, Althorpe's writings represent a, quote, continuous, deep-rooted, and decade-long commitment of advancing an extraordinarily violent, end quote, white supremacist ideology. Had he not pleaded guilty, Pashuk said the Crown would have asked for a life sentence. Quote, he's unleashed something that cannot be stopped, end quote, Pashuk told the judge. Quote, the intended consequences of his actions outlast his participation, no matter how remorseful he may be, end quote. Althorpe urged readers of his manifestos to incite fear in the public and called for attacks against LGBTQ2S+ people, Jews, and people of color. Recruitment videos he helped produce and circulate depicted armed men in white skull masks burning religious texts and American, Israeli, and pride flags as a narrator calls for a violent race war to overthrow the government while using a slur for Jews. And his activities weren't just limited to the online world. Althorpe also recruited a small group of neo-Nazis in the greater Hamilton area to train them as a militia, taking them on hikes and engaging in mixed martial arts. He was arrested in December 2023, along with 27-year-old Christopher Nipak, who still faces a judge-alone trial in January on one count of participating in the activities of a terrorist group. As part of their investigation, police searched Althorpe's and Nipak's residences, seizing clothing, books, and other materials demonstrating Nazi and fascist ideological beliefs, as well as multiple firearms and dozens of electronic devices. Photos of the Atomwaffen flag hanging on Althorpe's bedroom wall in his mother's basement were found on one of his devices. Clean-shaven and with his hair slicked back, Althorpe, who has been in custody since his arrest, sat behind his lawyers on Tuesday. His family, including his newborn daughter, sat nearby in the public gallery. Pashuk argued that his relatives have minimized Althorpe's conduct. His sister is quoted in a pre-sentence report as saying that the family has, quote, disregarded the charges, end quote, and, quote, only thinks of him as a person, end quote, while his mother said she believed her son had gone down some online, quote, rabbit holes, end quote, he shouldn't have during the COVID-19 pandemic. a forensic psychiatrist concluded that he meets the criteria for a borderline personality disorder, and that while he would likely do well in therapy, he should be approached with caution. Quote, as he has the ability to present himself as he knows others expect him to, end quote, Dr. Alina Iosif wrote. Althorp told Iosif that engaging with racist ideologies was his, quote, calming mechanism, end quote, for dealing with anxiety and depression, and that he has changed his line of thinking. Pashuk argued the judge should question his claims of genuine remorse, pointing out he also told Iosif that he hasn't, quote, completely left that headspace. Sometimes I wake up at night and I'm that same racist guy. I have to show remorse for court, but transparency for you, end quote. Althorp listened on Tuesday to various organizations deliver community impact statements about his crimes on behalf of Jewish, Muslim, Black, and LGBTQ2S+ communities. Quote, Althorp provided Canadian Jewry with yet another stark reminder that neo-Nazi white supremacist anti-Semitism is alive and well in Canada, end quote, said Rochelle Dierenfeld with the Alliance of Canadians Combating Anti-Semitism. She said the, quote, terrifying content he produced encourages like-minded or impressionable people to attack and kill Jews, end quote, who Dierenfeld said are already facing incidents and threats of violence and living with heightened concern for their safety in the wake of Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. Althorp's content spread a, quote, virus of extremism, end quote, and stripped Muslims of their humanity and painted them as an, quote, existential threat that must be confronted with violence, end quote, said Sarah Adouani with the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Quote, this process of dehumanization is a critical precursor to real-world violence, end quote, she said. His materials provided a step-by-step guide on how to harm and terrorize Black people, said Zainab Adousi with the Black Legal Action Center. Quote, for us, the involvement of individuals like Matthew Althorp is not an isolated criminal act. It is part of a broader and deeply troubling pattern that continues to place Black lives at risk, end quote, she said. Althorp's criminal conduct, quote, undermines social cohesion, end quote, erodes public trust and safety, and, quote, signals to marginalized people that their presence in civic life is conditional and contested, end quote, said Reverend Deanna Dudley with the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, a Christian church that Dudley described as a long-time, quote, spiritual home and place of refuge, end quote, for members of the LGBTQ2S+ community. OPP and border officials to announce results of, quote, complex, end quote, auto theft investigation today, by Joshua Smith. The Ontario Provincial Police and the Canada Border Services Agency will be revealing the results of a, quote, major, end quote, auto theft investigation Wednesday morning. Wednesday's event will, quote, outline the details of a complex and lengthy investigation into a criminal organization facilitating the movement of stolen vehicles from Canada to destinations overseas, end quote, the OPP said in a news release Tuesday. The probe is dubbed, quote, Project Chickadee, end quote. The joint news conference at the International Center in Mississauga will take place at 10:15 a.m., and it will also be live-streamed on the OPP's YouTube channel. Multiple representatives of both the OPP and the CBSA will be in attendance, including OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrick and Trishan Peskel, the CBSA's executive director for the GTA region. Businesses warn new Canadian steel tariffs could raise prices on everything from cars to new homes, by Sheila Reid. Some Canadian businesses fear they are about to get hammered by a new 25% tariff on imported steel derivative products introduced by the Canadian government to, quote, protect and transform, end quote, the industry. The tariff, which comes into effect on December 26th, applies to foreign goods containing steel, like wires, prefabricated buildings, wind towers, and fasteners such as nuts, bolts, screws, and rivets. The feds say the tariff is intended to push demand for homegrown steel and reduce reliance on foreign products. Kimberly Turner Briscoe, president of steel fastener distribution company Cardinal Fasteners, says she feels betrayed by the government. Quote, "It seems to me like our federal government has decided they want to be like Trump," end quote, says Turner Briscoe. Quote, "Who do you think you're protecting?" End quote. In November, the federal government introduced a series of tariffs on foreign lumber and steel that Prime Minister Mark Carney says will, quote, "empower workers and businesses," end quote, in sectors suffering under Trump's tariffs. But according to the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, there are few Canadian manufacturers that produce nuts, bolts, and screws. As a result, Turner Briscoe says she and other businesses like hers will have no choice but to raise prices. A move, she says, is sure to drive up the cost of everything from cars to new homes. Quote, "There's hundreds of us with product on the water or about to go on the water that are going to be hit with this 25% that we cannot afford," end quote, says Turner Briscoe, of the steel products already in transit that will be subject to the new levy on imports. According to Turner Briscoe, the announcement came without consultation or warning. John Fragos, press secretary to Minister of Finance François-Philippe Champagne, says the federal government has developed a targeted remissions order, full or partial relief from federal tax, interest, or penalties, that allows importers to apply for an exemption, evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Quote, "The government is working in lockstep with all its partners, including provincial and territorial governments, industry leaders, union representatives, and stakeholders, to respond in real time to tariffs and the impact they are having on Canada's businesses and workers," end quote, said Fragos in an emailed statement to the Star. The Canadian Steel Producers Association, or CSPA, which represents 17 domestic steel producers, quote, "applauds," end quote, the tariff that they expect will drive demand for Canadian steel and provide relief for domestic workers during Trump's trade war. François Desmarais, a vice president at CSPA, says the tariff is, in part, designed to make up for the hole left by U.S. importers that once made up half of Canada's steel exports. Quote, "If we want to keep our workers employed, we need to find ways to make up that volume," end quote, says Desmarais. While Desmarais says that Canadian steel has the capacity to provide for Canadian manufacturers and at a competitive price that is below that of the U.S. and Europe, small and medium-sized businesses beg to differ. Quote, "While Canada does have a steel and aluminum industry, there's a lot of products, especially the derivatives, that are not necessarily produced in Canada," end quote, says Michelle Auger, a director at the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, or CFIB. Auger says that while the tariff might be a nudge to spur domestic production, there must be supports in place for businesses that rely on foreign products. The CFIB was not consulted by the government, which, Auger says, adds to the uncertainty that looms over Canadian businesses in the midst of Trump's chaotic economic policy. This comes at a critical time, as Turner Briscoe says her Scarborough-based business only recently recovered from a pandemic-induced slump and that she can't take another hit. She says she and other distributors will be forced to increase their prices by 25%, a move she predicts will have rippling effects throughout the already flailing housing sector, as fasteners are, quite literally, the nuts and bolts of the construction industry. Quote, "People don't realize how much they use it, and it's used in everything," end quote, says Turner Briscoe. Quote, "Building cars, building houses, you name it," end quote. Auger says the CFIB is hearing similar warnings from a lot of businesses whose operational costs will go up. One member told her that he put his full-time staff down to a 4-day work week to increase cash flow amid the uncertainty. Quote, I can see if there were an actual industry to save and to protect, but there's not, end quote, says Turner Briscoe, whose company has been in business for 75 years. Quote, one of my suppliers in Montreal had to bring up 5 or 6 people from Colombia just to keep his machines going, end quote. In the meantime, Turner Briscoe says she's already warned some of her customers of the imminent price hikes that she says are necessary to stay in business. Quote, I have a lot of customers that we've been doing business with for 30-some years, says Turner Briscoe. Shutting down isn't an option, end quote. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump is previewing his 2026 agenda in an address to the nation as his popularity wanes, by Josh Boak. President Donald Trump intends to preview his agenda for next year and beyond in a live speech from the White House on Wednesday night. His remarks are coming at a crucial time as he tries to rebuild his steadily eroding popularity. The White House offered few details about what the Republican president intends to emphasize in the 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time speech. Public polling shows most U.S. adults are frustrated with his handling of the economy as inflation picked up after his tariffs raised prices and hiring slowed. Trump's mass deportations of immigrants have also proved unpopular, even as he is viewed favorably for halting crossings along the U.S. border with Mexico. The public has generally been nonplussed by his income tax cuts and globe-trotting efforts to end conflicts, attack suspected drug boats near Venezuela, and attract investment dollars into the United States. In 2026, Trump and his party face a referendum on their leadership as the nation heads into the midterm elections that will decide control of the House and Senate. Trump has said that he thinks more Americans would back him if they simply heard him describe his track record. Administration officials say investment commitments for new factories will reverse the recent decline in manufacturing jobs, and that consumer activity will improve dramatically as people receive increased tax refunds next year. Quote, it has been a great year for our country and the best is yet to come, end quote, Trump said in a Tuesday social media post announcing the speech. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said that Trump would discuss his achievements this year and his plans for the remainder of his second term. Trump has been omnipresent on social media and television this year with his impromptu news conferences and speeches, but addresses to the nation often can be relatively sober affairs, as was Trump's June address describing the U.S. bombing of nuclear facilities in Iran. The president has eschewed the messaging discipline that's common among most politicians, an authenticity that appeals to some voters and repels others. In a speech in Pennsylvania last week, he said his tariffs might mean that American children should have fewer dolls and pencils, while confirming a previously denied story from his first term in 2018 that he did not want immigrants from, quote, shithole countries, end quote. On Monday, Trump on his social media site blamed Rob Reiner's vocal objections to the president for the killing of the actor-director and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. A report released on Tuesday showed a job market that looks increasingly fragile, even if the overall economy still appears to be stable. Employers were adding on average 122,750 jobs a month during the first 4 months of this year. But since Trump announced his broad tariffs in April, monthly job gains have averaged a paltry 17,000, as the unemployment rate has climbed from 4% in January to 4.6%. Trump's team has blamed Democratic lawmakers for shutting down the government for the job losses reported Tuesday during October. The president continues to blame his predecessor, Democrat Joe Biden, for any challenges the nation might face over inflation or ending Russia's war in Ukraine. Jack Smith set for private interview with lawmakers about Trump investigations, by Eric Tucker and Lisa Mascaro. Former Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith is set for a closed-door interview with House Republicans on Wednesday after lawmakers rebuffed his offer to testify publicly about his investigations into President Donald Trump. The private deposition is part of an ongoing investigation by the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee into the Justice Department's criminal inquiries of Trump during the Biden administration. Smith was subpoenaed earlier this month to provide both testimony and documents, and his lawyers indicated that he would cooperate with the congressional demand, despite having volunteered more than a month earlier to answer questions publicly before the committee. Quote, "We are disappointed that offer was rejected, and that the American people will be denied the opportunity to hear directly from Jack on these topics," end quote, one of his lawyers, Peter Koski, said in a statement earlier this month. Quote, "Jack looks forward to meeting with the committee later this month to discuss his work and clarify the various misconceptions about his investigation," end quote. Trump told reporters at the White House that he supported the idea of an open hearing, saying, quote, "I'd rather see him testify publicly. There's no way he can answer the questions," end quote. Smith is expected to discuss both of his investigations of Trump, but will not answer questions that call for grand jury materials, which are restricted by law, according to a person familiar with the investigation, who insisted on anonymity to discuss the interview. He is also expected to correct what he regards as mischaracterizations from Republicans about his work, including about his team's use of cell phone records belonging to certain GOP lawmakers, the person said. Smith was appointed in 2022 to oversee the Justice Department investigations into Trump's efforts to overturn his 2020 presidential election loss and his hoarding of classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Palm Beach, Florida. Smith's team filed charges in both investigations. Smith abandoned the cases after Trump was elected to the White House again last year, citing Justice Department legal opinions that say a sitting president cannot be indicted. Republicans who control Congress have sought interviews with at least some individual members of Smith's team. In recent weeks, they have seized on revelations that the team, as part of its investigation, had analyzed the phone records of select GOP lawmakers from on and around January 6, 2021, when pro-Trump rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol to try to halt the certification of Trump's election loss to Democrat Joe Biden. The phone records reviewed by prosecutors included details only about the incoming and outgoing phone numbers and the length of the call, but not the contents of the conversation. Investigators release additional video of possible Brown gunman as search continues, by Kimberly Crusay and Lee Willingham. Authorities have asked the public for any footage they might have of the gunman who fatally shot 2 students and wounded 9 others at Brown University, even as they released a new video timeline and a slightly clearer image of a possible suspect. Investigators provided no indication Tuesday that they were any closer to zeroing in on his identity. In all the videos made public, the suspect's face was masked or turned away, and authorities have only been able to give a vague description of him as being stocky and about 5 foot 8 inches or 173 centimeters tall. Officers have been canvassing around Providence in search of clues that might help them figure out who was behind Saturday's campus shooting. Surveillance video the FBI posted online before it was removed showed a person in dark clothing walking along multiple sidewalks for about an hour starting shortly after 2 p.m. Saturday. The streets were all within a few blocks of the Brown University Engineering Building where the shooting occurred. Some clips show the person walking in front of some properties several times. In one, the person abruptly turns around and runs in the other direction when someone approaches. 2 clips taken minutes after the shooting show the person walking away from a parking lot and then along a street. Police have received about 200 tips, and Colonel Oscar Perez, the Providence police chief, asked the public on Tuesday to look at their camera systems in the area to see if they have footage that might help officials identify the suspected gunman. Quote, "We're looking for a moment that is shorter than someone taking a breath," end quote, Perez said. A lack of cameras and clear video of the gunman has continued to frustrate both authorities and the community. while Brown President Christina Paxson confirmed Tuesday that the campus has 1,200 cameras, law enforcement says there is no clear video of the shooter from inside the engineering building. Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nerona defended the investigation as going, quote, really well, end quote, as he pleaded for public patience in locating the suspected killer. Large questions remain, particularly about the shooter's motive. When pressed about a connection to ethnicity, political motive, or culture, Nerona said, quote, that is a dangerous road to go down, end quote. Plans for attack in New Orleans thwarted, authorities say, by Sarah Klein. Plans to, quote, carry out an attack, end quote, in New Orleans were thwarted after an ex-Marine was arrested while on the way to the Louisiana city with guns and body armor in the car, according to court documents obtained Tuesday by the Associated Press. Micah James Legnan, 28, was charged with threats in interstate commerce, federal authorities said after they had been surveilling Legnan due to ties to an extremist anti-capitalist and anti-government group. 4 members of the group were arrested Friday in the Mojave Desert east of Los Angeles as they were rehearsing a foiled plot to set off bombs in Southern California on New Year's Eve, authorities said. Plans of an attack in New Orleans began to intensify after several hundred immigration agents were deployed to southeast Louisiana, authorities said. The enforcement operation, dubbed, quote, Catahoula Crunch, end quote, has a goal of 5,000 arrests. The crackdown is the latest in a series of enforcement operations that have also unfolded in Los Angeles, Chicago, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Legnan believed it was time to, quote, recreate, end quote, Waco with an attack in New Orleans, authorities said in court documents. They pointed to a December 4th chat message by Legnan written under the alias, quote, Kateri the Witch, end quote, the day after immigration and customs enforcement agents arrived in New Orleans. Legnan's alias had, quote, she/her, end quote, written beside it, but jail records referred to Legnan as male. Investigators believe Legnan's chat message referred to the 1993 siege at Waco, Texas, compound that ended after 51 days and the deaths of 4 federal agents, a religious leader, and 76 of his followers. 8 days after the post in the group chat, Legnan appeared to place a weapon into a car, an FBI agent surveilling Legnan said in the court document. Quote, on my way, end quote, to New Orleans, Legnan said in a group chat. Legnan then shared a video of a gun and bulletproof vest and wrote, quote, just in case, end quote. After Legnan's December 12th arrest, agents found an assault rifle, a pistol, a gas canister, and body armor inside the car. Inside Legnan's apartment in New Iberia, Louisiana, agents found sniper training manuals, SWAT training manuals, assault rifles, and rounds of ammunition. Court documents did not list an attorney who could speak on Legnan's behalf. The Office of the State Public Defender and the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of Louisiana did not immediately respond to requests for information on Legnan's attorney, and jail officials said they did not know who might be representing Legnan. Officials say Legnan, quote, is suspected to be associated with, end quote, the Turtle Island Liberation Front. The group calls for, quote, liberation through decolonization, tribal sovereignty, end quote, based on court documents. Federal authorities describe the group as a, quote, far-left, pro-Palestine, anti-government, and anti-capitalist group, end quote. In the California case, a member of the group created a detailed plan to bomb 5 or more businesses across Southern California on New Year's Eve. The plot included planting backpacks filled with complex pipe bombs that were set to be detonated simultaneously at midnight on New Year's Eve. 2 of the group's members also had discussed plans to attack ICE agents and vehicles with pipe bombs in 2026, according to the criminal complaint. Some details of the foiled plot in California are eerily similar to this year's deadly attack in New Orleans' famed French Quarter. In the early hours of January 1, 2025, Samsud-din Jabbar drove his truck down Bourbon Street, plowing into New Year's revelers, killing 14 people and injuring dozens more. Prior to the attack, Jabbar, who was later fatally shot by police, had placed multiple bombs in coolers around the French Quarter. None of the explosive devices detonated. Jabbar was inspired by the Islamic State group, authorities said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Putin warns that Russia will seek to extend its gains in Ukraine if peace talks fail, by the Associated Press. Russian President Vladimir Putin warned Wednesday that Moscow will seek to extend its gains in Ukraine if Kyiv and its Western allies reject the Kremlin's demands in peace talks. U.S. President Donald Trump has unleashed an extensive diplomatic push to end nearly 4 years of fighting following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. But Washington's efforts have run into sharply conflicting demands by Moscow and Kyiv. Speaking at an annual meeting with top military officers, Putin said Moscow would prefer to achieve its goals and, quote, eliminate the root cause of the conflict, end quote, by diplomatic means. But he added that, quote, if the opposing side and its foreign patrons refuse to engage in substantive dialogue, Russia will achieve the liberation of its historical lands by military means, end quote. Ukraine and its Western allies regard Russia's actions as a violation of its sovereignty and an unprovoked act of aggression. Putin claimed that, quote, the Russian army has seized and is firmly holding strategic initiative all along the front line, end quote, and warned that Moscow will move to expand a, quote, buffer security zone, end quote, alongside the Russian border. Quote, our troops are different now. They are battle-hardened, and there is no other such army in the world now, end quote, he said. Putin praised Russia's growing military might and particularly noted the modernization of its atomic arsenal, including the new nuclear-capable intermediate-range Oreshnik ballistic missile that he said will officially enter combat duty this month. Russia first tested a conventionally armed version of the Oreshnik to strike a Ukrainian factory in November 2024, and Putin has boasted that it's impossible to intercept. Putin's tough statements follow several rounds of talks this week between Ukrainian, American, and European officials on a U.S.-drafted peace plan. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said after meeting with U.S. envoys in Berlin that the document could be finalized within days, after which U.S. envoys will present it to the Kremlin. Putin wants all the areas in 4 key regions captured by his forces, as well as Crimea, which was illegally annexed in 2014, to be recognized as Russian territory. He also has demanded that Ukraine withdraw from some areas in eastern Ukraine that Moscow's forces have not captured yet. The Kremlin also insists that Ukraine abandon its bid to join NATO and warns it won't accept the deployment of any troops from NATO members and will view them as, quote, legitimate target, end quote. Zelensky has expressed readiness to drop Ukraine's bid to join NATO if the U.S. and other Western nations give Kyiv security guarantees similar to those offered to NATO members. But Ukraine's preference remains NATO membership as the best security guarantee to prevent further Russian aggression. At the same time, Zelensky has rejected Moscow's demands that it pull back its troops from other areas that Russia has not been able to take by force. The Ukrainian leader described the draft peace plan discussed with the U.S. during talks in Berlin on Monday as, quote, not perfect, end quote, but, quote, very workable, end quote, noting that Kyiv and its allies were very close to a deal on, quote, strong security guarantees, end quote. But he also emphasized that the key issue of control over territory remained unresolved and rejected the U.S. push for Ukraine to cede control over the eastern Donetsk region. Reporting to Putin at Wednesday's military meeting, Defense Minister Andrei Belousov spelled out plans for further advances, saying the latest Russian advances in Donetsk have set the stage for a quick push into the Ukrainian-controlled part of the region. Belousov also declared that Russian troops were preparing to drive Ukrainian forces from parts I'm going to spell this, Zaporizhzhia region that Moscow also annexed in 2022, but never fully captured, as well as extend gains in neighboring, we'll spell this again, Dnipropetrovsk. Quote, the key task for the next year is to preserve and accelerate the tempo of the offensive, end quote, he said. Belousov spelled out plans for expanding Russian military capabilities, focusing on drones, jamming equipment, and air defense assets. As Russia continues its grinding advances in many sectors of the front, it also pummeled Ukraine with daily missile and drone strikes. At least 26 people were injured by Russian glide bombs in Zaporizhzhia and its vicinity, according to Regional Administration Head Ivan Fedorov. The attack damaged several residential buildings as well as infrastructure and an educational facility. At least 69 long-range drones were launched by Russia overnight, the Ukrainian Air Force said. Air defenses intercepted or jammed 29 drones in the morning, with the assault continuing during the day. Russia's defense ministry said that air defenses downed 94 Ukrainian drones overnight. In Russia's southern Krasnodar region, drones injured 2 people and damaged several private houses, according to regional emergency officials. In the southwestern Voronezh region, Governor Alexander Gusev said drone fragments damaged a power line serving an infrastructure facility, causing a blaze that was quickly extinguished. Louvre workers vote to extend a strike as the museum partially reopens, by Thomas Adamson and Sylvie Corbett. Employees at the Louvre Museum voted to extend a strike that has disrupted operations at the world's most visited museum, though the venue partially opened Wednesday to allow visitors to enjoy its highlights. The museum said visitors had access to a limited, quote, masterpiece route, end quote, which includes Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa and the Venus de Milo. Quote, due to a strike, some rooms at the Louvre Museum are closed, end quote, it said on social media. Quote, we apologize for any inconvenience, end quote. Union workers are protesting chronic understaffing, building deterioration, and recent management decisions, pressures intensified by a brazen crown jewels heist in October that exposed serious security lapses. The strike decision came during a morning General Assembly after workers adopted the walkout unanimously earlier this week. The museum was closed Tuesday for its weekly day off. Culture Ministry officials held crisis talks with unions Monday and proposed to cancel a $6.7 million cut in 2026 funding, opening new recruitment for gallery guards and visitor services, and increased staff compensation. Union officials said the measures fell short. Louvre President Laurence Descartes was scheduled to appear before the Senate's Culture Committee Wednesday as lawmakers probe security failures at the museum. Descartes has acknowledged an, quote, institutional failure, end quote, following the heist, but has come under renewed scrutiny after admitting she only learned of a critical 2019 security audit after the robbery. France's Court of Auditors and a separate administrative inquiry have since criticized delays in implementing a long-promised security overhaul. The Culture Ministry announced emergency anti-intrusion measures last month and assigned Philippe Jost, who oversaw the Notre Dame restoration, to help reorganize the museum. The move was widely seen as a sign of mounting pressure on Louvre leadership. Thousands protest Slovak leader Fico over whistleblower office closure and penal code changes, by the Associated Press. Thousands rallied across Slovakia on Tuesday to protest the latest moves by the government of populist Prime Minister Robert Fico to dismantle an independent office that protects those who report corruption and other criminal activities, and amend the penal code. Rallies took place in 10 communities, including the capital Bratislava, where the protesters at Freedom Square had a message for Fico, quote, resign, resign, end quote. Fico has long been a divisive figure in Slovakia, and people rally often to protest his pro-Russian and other policies. This time, people were angered after lawmakers in parliament loyal to Fico's coalition government approved a plan to cancel the Whistleblower Protection Office last week, despite critical responses to such a move at home and abroad. In another controversial step, they voted to ban the use of evidence gathered from the suspects who cooperated with law enforcement authorities in exchange for a lower sentence. Such evidence cannot also be used if they lied in any other case. A banner in the crowd read, quote, "Fico's government helps mafia," end quote. Michal Semenchka, the head of the Progressive Slovakia opposition party that organized the rally, told the crowd, quote, "Slovakia is the only country where the government approves laws to make life easier for criminals and mafia," end quote. Quote, "Shame, shame," end quote, people chanted. The opposition charged that the changes were designed to help a prominent ally of Fico, Deputy Speaker of Parliament Tibor Gaspar, who should face trial on charges of establishing a criminal group. Protesters called on President Peter Pellegrini, usually an ally of Fico, to veto the changes. Pellegrini has to sign the legislation to become law, but the government has a majority to override it. Fico's critics claim that under his government, Slovakia is following the direction of Hungary under Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Laszlo Kubik, head of the Hungarian Alliance, a party that represents 450,000-strong Hungarian minority in Slovakia, joined the anti-government protest for the first time. UK gives Abramovich last chance to give Chelsea sale proceeds to victims of Russia's war in Ukraine, by the Associated Press. Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich has been given a final chance to turn over the £2.5 billion, or $3.25 billion, that he promised to give victims of Russia's war in Ukraine from the sale of Premier League club Chelsea, the British government said Wednesday. Abramovich was forced to sell the club after being sanctioned by the UK for his connection to Russian President Vladimir Putin, following Moscow's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Before the sale in 2022, Abramovich said that he would set up a war victims charity, but hasn't followed through. Quote, "The clock is ticking on Roman Abramovich to honor the commitment he made when Chelsea FC was sold," end quote, Prime Minister Keir Starmer said. Quote, "This government is prepared to enforce it through the courts so that every penny reaches those whose lives have been torn apart by Putin's illegal war," end quote. Abramovich couldn't be immediately reached for comment. The funds are frozen, but still belong to Abramovich, and negotiations have failed to reach an agreement on their release. Abramovich, who bought Chelsea in 2003, sold the club to a consortium fronted by Americans Todd Boehly and Clearlake Capital. Chelsea won the Champions League twice and the Premier League 5 times, among other titles, during Abramovich's time as owner. Costa Rica's Congress blocks effort to prosecute president for election interference, by the Associated Press. Costa Rica's legislature on Tuesday blocked an effort by the country's electoral authority to make President Rodrigo Chavez face charges that he has been using his power to meddle in upcoming elections. The legislature rejected a request by the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to strip Chavez of protections that shield sitting presidents from prosecution. The tribunal is seeking to prosecute him on accusations that Chavez repeatedly violated a Costa Rican law barring the president from commenting on elections or expressing support for any political group, including his own party. Chavez denied any wrongdoing ahead of the Central American nation's February elections and says he is the victim of a politically motivated prosecution. He survived a similar vote in September, when the Costa Rica Supreme Court sought to strip him of immunity to investigate him on corruption charges. Chavez has won these votes largely due to his ruling Social Democratic Progress Party and its allies' power in Congress. During a lengthy debate, Pilar Cisneros, a leader of the ruling party in Congress, insisted that Chavez was innocent of any crime. Quote, has President Chavez ever mentioned a candidate or a party for which to vote? No, he has not, she said. He cannot be condemned for a crime that does not exist, end quote. Opposition lawmakers countered that Chavez has repeatedly used his weekly press conferences to promote the idea that the next government should have more lawmakers representing it in Congress, framing it as a clear attempt to influence the upcoming vote. Chavez's party does not have a majority and regularly has to scrape together votes from other parties to pass his agenda. Shortly after the decision, Costa Rica's electoral authority confirmed that the case against Chavez would be, quote, temporarily suspended, end quote, but that, quote, it will resume once Mr. Chavez Robles's immunity expires at the end of his presidential term on May 8th, end quote. Chavez is not eligible for a second term, as Costa Rican law bars sitting presidents from serving consecutive terms. Public officials found to have violated neutrality rules can face penalties ranging from dismissal to a 2 to 4 year ban on holding public office. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. FIFA announces 2026 World Cup winner will take home a record US $50 million by the Canadian Press. The 2026 World Cup champion will take home a record $50 million, all figures in US dollars, with every one of the 48 participating teams collecting at least $10.5 million. The FIFA Council, meeting ahead of the FIFA Intercontinental Cup final in Doha, Qatar, announced that a record $727 million will be distributed through the expanded Sport 104 game showcase. Some $655 million of that will be paid out as prize money among the 48 participating teams. The runner-up will collect $33 million, with the third-place side picking up $29 million and the fourth-place finisher $27 million. That goes all the way down to $9 million for teams finishing 33rd to 48th. In addition, each qualified team will receive $1.5 million to cover preparation costs. The announcement comes in the wake of widespread criticism of FIFA for inflated ticket prices at the tournament co-hosted by Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. A photographer finds thousands of dinosaur footprints near Italian Winter Olympic venue, by Colleen Berry. A wildlife photographer stumbled upon one of the oldest and largest known collections of dinosaur footprints, dating back about 210 million years to the Triassic period, high in an Italian national park near the 2026 Milan Cortina Winter Olympic venue of Bormio, officials announced Tuesday. The discovery in the Stelvio National Park was striking for the sheer number of footprints, estimated at as many as 20,000 over some 5 kilometers or 3 miles, and the location near the Swiss border, once a prehistoric coastal area that has never previously yielded dinosaur tracks, experts said. Quote, this time reality really surpasses fantasy, end quote, said Cristiano Dal Sasso, a paleontologist at Milan's Natural History Museum, who received the first call from wildlife photographer Elio della Ferrera after making the discovery. The dinosaur prints are believed to have been made by long-necked bipedal herbivores that were up to 10 meters or 33 feet long, weighing up to 4 tons. Similar to a Plateosaurus, Del Sasso said. Some of the tracks were 40 centimeters wide, with visible claws. The footprints indicated that the dinosaurs traveled in packs, and they sometimes stopped in circular formations, possibly as a protective measure. Quote, there are very obvious traces of individuals that have walked at a slow, calm, quiet, rhythmic pace without running, end quote, Del Sasso told a press conference. The tracks were discovered by Della Ferrera, who set out to photograph deer and vultures in September, when his camera was trained on a vertical wall about 600 meters, nearly 2,000 feet, above the nearest road. The location, some 2,400 to 2,800 meters, or 7,900 to 9,200 feet, above sea level, on a north-facing wall that is mostly in the shade, made the footprints, though in plain sight, particularly hard to spot without a very strong lens, Del Sasso said. Della Ferrara said something strange caught his eye, and he scaled a vertical rock wall with some difficulty to get a closer look. Quote, "The huge surprise was not so much in discovering the footprints, but in discovering such a huge quantity," Della Ferrara said. "There are really tens of thousands of prints up there, more or less, well preserved," end quote. The entrance of the park where the prints were discovered is located just 2 kilometers, or a mile, from the mountain town of Bormio, where men's alpine skiing will be held during the February 6th to 22nd Games. Lombardy Regional Governor Attilio Fontana hailed the discovery as a, quote, "gift for the Olympics," end quote, even if the site is too remote to access in the winter, and plans for eventual public access have not been made. Thousands flock to a Tokyo zoo to see the last 2 pandas in Japan before their return to China. By Mari Yamaguchi and Ayaka McGill. Thousands of people flock to Tokyo's Ueno Zoo to have a last glimpse of the popular twin pandas that are set to return to China next month, worried if or when they get to see their replacement in Japan as Tokyo's relations with Beijing sunk. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government announced Monday that Zhao Zhao and his sister Lele will return to China in late January, and that their last day of public viewing will be January 25th. Their departure will leave Japan without a panda for the first time in more than half a century. Prospects for the replacement are not favorable, as ties between the 2 countries have plunged in recent weeks. Giant pandas are native to southwestern China and serve as an unofficial national mascot. Beijing lends them to other countries as a sign of goodwill, but maintains ownership over them and any cubs they produce. Yuki Imai, a panda fan visiting from the neighboring Kanagawa Prefecture, said she was shocked by the news of the twins' return and decided to visit. Quote, "I thought I should come and see them soon while I still can," end quote. Many queued for more than 2 hours to get to see the twins for 1 minute. Kazuhiro Yamamoto said he came to see the pandas with his wife Hiroko, quote, "for the one last time," end quote, and that the twins may be returning sooner due to the rocky relations. The 4-year-old twins were born at Tokyo's Ueno Zoological Gardens in June 2021 and raised there, but they remain on loan from China and must be returned by February. Relations between Japan and China have worsened since Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi said in early November that its military could get involved if China were to impose a naval blockade or other action against Taiwan, the self-governing island that Beijing claims as its own. China has since restricted tourism to Japan, and cultural events and exchanges between local governments have been canceled. The row escalated this month when Chinese drills involving an aircraft carrier near southern Japan prompted Tokyo to scramble fighter jets. Japan also protested that its aircraft were targeted by repeated radar locking, a move considered as possible preparations for missile firing. Tadashi Nakatani, a 51-year-old calligrapher at a temple who regularly visits from his hometown of Kamakura west of Tokyo, said international relations may affect the panda diplomacy, but he has hope. Quote, "When things calm down and the relationship becomes stable, I sincerely hope that pandas will come again and that a day will come when everyone can enjoy seeing them again," end quote. China sent the first pair of pandas to Japan in 1972 to mark the normalization of diplomatic ties between the 2 countries. Since then, Japan has never been left without a panda. Thousands of visitors formed a long line outside the zoo Tuesday morning. During their 1-minute viewing time at the Panda Zone, visitors called out the twins' name and took photos or videos as the pair nibbled bamboo sticks or strolled around. Beginning next week, only up to 4,800 visitors who successfully booked their 1-minute slot online will be able to see the beloved twins, according to the zoo. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Minoru Kihara said Monday that pandas have long been loved by Japanese people, and he hoped the friendship through panda diplomacy between the 2 countries will continue. Quote, "Exchanges through pandas have contributed to improve the public sentiment between Japan and China, and we hope the relationship will continue, end quote, Kihara said. He noted that a number of local municipalities and zoos have expressed hope that new pandas will be loaned out soon. Ueno Zoological Gardens curator Hitoshi Suzuki, referring to the panda twins, said raising them in good health was challenging. Quote, but they gave us many kinds of joy and surprise. They also brought great delight to our visitors. We have nothing but words of gratitude, end quote. The zoo plans to promote other animals to make up for the absence of the pandas while waiting for their replacement. Quote, we will keep the pandas area for the time being so that we can accommodate possible new arrivals at any time, end quote. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the 17th of December issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Rachel Durkin Durga. Thank you for listening.